So, my friends, I have some advice for you. If you are considering getting into a career that might involve public speaking, the first rule is never sign up to a conference where you're going to have to speak immediately following Jordan Peterson, okay? This is an amateur move. It's just going to look bad, make you look bad. Don't do it. So look, I want to thank Dan Crenshaw. He's one of the best we got. It's so rare in politics to have someone who's a courageous warrior, not for himself, but for the larger cause. You know, the way politics usually works, I love this quote, came up not too long ago. You know, Kamala Harris got her start in politics. We're not supposed to talk about this, but she got her start by having an affair with this great Democratic power broker named Willie Brown. He was the mayor of San Francisco and then was Speaker of the California House. And someone was doing a profile of Kamala Harris and had to deal with this and asked Willie Brown about it. And Willie Brown said, it was a relationship made in heaven because Kamala loved me and I loved me, which is the way most politicians think. But thank God Dan Crenshaw doesn't. And then I want to thank all of you, right? I'm just a pundit. I just sit at my desk and write, occasionally come and give speaks. You guys are on the front lines. And if you haven't noticed, your progressive peers are very likely the craziest generation in all of American history, okay? And this is a particularly dire and threatening form of lunacy, right? It's not as though they're like the crazy guy who lives down the block and, you know, he's very nice, but he thinks his microwave is controlling the fluctuations in the stock market or something like that. No. I mean, these people in spirit are like the Khmer Rouge. They're like the Jacobins. They're not going to leave their lunacy alone, you know, just for themselves. They really think if you use the wrong pronouns for them, you deserve to be trundled off and executed at dawn, right? These people are totally nuts. And Dan mentioned Ronald Reagan in his introduction. There's a story about Ronald Reagan when he was the governor of California in the 1960s, a time of great turmoil and tumult in American life, a lot of anti-war protesters, a new left who wanted to tear down the country as it existed. And Reagan was going to a meeting at the University of California, and when he was there, word got out, Ronald Reagan is here, all these protesters gather around the front door. His aides say, why don't you sneak out around the back? He's like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to walk through these kids. And he goes and gets into his gubernatorial limo, and, you know, these hippies, tie-dye, probably unwashed, you know, probably not smelling that great, start pounding on the window of the car, chanting, "We are the future. We are the future." And Reagan supposedly rolled down the window a little bit and said, in that case, I'm going to sell my bonds. And that's totally true now as well. If your peers, progressive peers, are the future, we got to sell our bonds and shut everything down and get the heck out of Dodge. But if you are the future, this will be a great country for another 50 years. So that's really important that you guys are in this fight. And let me mention very briefly, if you're not familiar with National Review, we're a magazine, a website, published since 1955. We're in the fight every day, and we're here not just to tell you you're right, we do believe you're right, but tell you why you're right, using facts and reason and the very best arguments. And we got a great deal going. It's in your tote bag. You can get free access to all our content. If you have trouble signing up, you want to do it a little quicker, we've got a booth out back. We'd be happy to sign you up and happy to have you as readers. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about nationalism. And this debate, like many debates in our politics and public life, it depends on terminology and people using the right terms. And as conservatives, we always are against euphemism, right? We don't want to let people off the hook by making up new vocabulary words. There's a lot of that going on right now. But I have to say, realistically, we are never going to succeed in this effort. And I'll just give you really briefly an example from my personal life why it's been brought home to me that this is true. So our little daughter, a couple years ago, she learned the word stupid, right? And kids, when they learn kind of a bad word, they're they're really happy with it. They're delighted with it. They use it all the time. And this isn't the worst word. I mean, she'll learn worse words in the future. But it gets irritating. So she's saying stupid, stupid, stupid all the time. And I took her aside and said, honey, why don't you use the word ill-considered instead? So, I'm the editor of National Review. I got to try at least, right? Of course, it made zero impression on her. Stupid, stupid, stupid. So it goes, ill-considered, no, stupid, stupid, stupid. And then one morning around this time, she was getting potty trained, and my wife would throw in these pads in her pants just as extra insurance. And she went and used the bathroom in the morning, and in an excess of zeal, took out the pad, chucked it in the toilet, flushed the whole thing. It backs up in like a massive disaster in the bathroom. My wife, as moms of young kids are, is often on edge. And when something like this happens, she blames me. I don't know why it's my fault. Maybe it is. But I'm in there. I'm swabbing. I'm plunging. I'm swabbing some more. And she's like, Rich, you got to talk to her. You got to talk to her. She's like, okay, I'll talk to her. Plunge, swab, plunge, swab. And after like 20 minutes, I come out. It's like, okay, we're going to have this great father-daughter moment. I take her on my knee, and I was like, honey, what did you do wrong? And she said, Daddy, I did something ill-considered. So that's the way we usually operate. But let's get real terms here with nationalism. Serious subject. We've heard a lot about nationalism the last couple of years. So people tend to think patriotism is a word for everything that's good and true about national feeling, and nationalism is the word for everything bad about national feeling, and this just makes zero sense whatsoever. Patriotism, the root is patre, the Latin, same root as patriarchy. It means homeland, fatherland. It means love of our own, which is an important and natural phenomenon in its own right. Nationalism is something different. Nationalism is the doctrine or the belief that a distinct people, united by a distinct history and culture and language, should govern a distinct piece of territory. That is nationalism. And this is a very deep-seated and natural phenomenon that is not a recent invention, that has defined our world for a very long time. And just let me give you a practical example. Joan of Arc, okay? Not one of history's great monsters, one of history's most admired people. Joan of Arc, she's in France in the year 1425. She's a 13-year-old girl, and she has a vision in her father's garden. The Archangel Michael tells her it is her duty as a teenage girl to liberate France from the English, who have the idea that France belongs to them, and they're going to put their heirs on the throne of France. This is quite the vision, right? This is quite the vision. She goes about convincing the authorities in France, I had this vision, and you got to let me go fight the English with our forces. And out of incredible forcefulness of personality, obviously, she convinces them to let her do this. And she goes to the city of Orleans, which the English are besieging, and she starts sending them messages. Like she's firing arrows with written messages on it, like, this is your last warning. Please leave France or I'll kill all of you, okay? And the English, these hard-bitten guys, take this as seriously as you think, which is not at all. They yell back insults. They call her a whore. And she reacts as you would expect an insulted teenage girl to react. She dissolves in tears. And then she does what no teenage girl had done in world history before or has done since. When this battle reached its culminating point, she led the French troops riding a white horse carrying a 12-foot banner with an image of Christ on it, and they chased the English away from the city and break the siege. A start of a string of extraordinary French victories where what Joan had set out to do actually happens. They put the French heir becomes the king of France. Now, eventually her luck runs out. She's captured. She's handed over to the English. The English try her in what's, in effect, a show trial. They're very obsessed with the fact that she was wearing men's clothes. Clearly, the idea that males should compete in female sports would not have gone over well in 15th century England, right? But they find her guilty. They burn her at the stake. They take her ashes, and they scatter them in the River Seine. And why do they do that? They do it to wipe out any memory of this girl, 19 years old. Any memory. But did they succeed? No. They failed miserably because Joan had become a symbol of her nation and therefore extremely powerful, ineradicable. And her memory would be vindicated, it would be honored. When the French were occupied by a much worse foreign force centuries later, the Nazi Germany, the Free French forces, they adopted her symbol, the Cross of Lorraine. They flew it from their ships. They painted it on their airplanes. And another great symbol of France, Charles de Gaulle, the leader of those French forces, when eventually, decades later, he dies, his home village puts a 145-foot tall Cross of Lorraine outside the city gates to honor him, going back to Joan. In a nutshell, that is nationalism, okay? Now, nationalism can be abused. Anything that's natural and powerful can be abused. Love and sex are abused. We don't say, therefore, no one should get married or procreate. Militaries are abused. Vladimir Putin is abusing military force as we speak. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't have a military in the United States, right? So nationalism, it shouldn't be divisive. It actually, in its proper form, is unifying. It's something that exists above race and creed and tribal divisions. It's nationalism that gets us beyond me, you, her, that guy over there, and lets us talk in the first person plural. We, us, our. And that's extremely important. Societies that can't do that, that don't have that national cohesion, cannot make democracy work. They have civil wars, they have coups, they have all sorts of divisions that they can't bridge. But we do. We do have that cohesion and that unity. Now, there are people who will say, okay, I'll grant everything you said, but our nationalism is different because it's just civic nationalism. It's just shared citizenship. It's just shared ideals. And there's a lot of truth to that, but it's not the entire truth. Cultural nationalism is very important, even in this country. So let's just hypothetically say there's a white European American who meets an African American tonight on the steps of the Paris Opera House, right? Instantly, doesn't matter where they are from this country, doesn't matter what their politics are, instantly they have more in common than anyone else around them. They speak the same language. They dress largely the same. They probably like the same kind of food, and whether they know it or not, they have this deep reservoir of common cultural reference points and knowledge, whether it's sports, whether it's pop culture, whether it's the King James Bible. And that cultural cohesion also is extremely important. And also nations depend on myths, right? Now, what do I mean by myths? I don't mean Paul Bunyan. I don't mean Washington supposedly chopping down the cherry tree. I mean deep truths that you repeat over and over about yourself and that you hold up as ideals. Let me give you an example. We all know the painting Washington crossing the Delaware, right? You know, Washington standing up there, you have guys standing up with a flag, beautiful painting, probably maybe one of the foremost visual cliches in American life. Now, debunkers have a field day with this painting. They point out, well, at this point in the Revolution, there was no stars and stripes, right? The American flag did not exist. It would have been a regimental flag. Oh, and by the way, the painting has James Monroe, an important officer of Washington's, holding the flag. He wasn't in a boat that night crossing the Delaware. He was back on the shore in New Jersey. You know what? There's this luminous light in the painting. The crossing happened at night during a nor'easter. There was no luminous light that night. Oh, and by the way, the painting has these wonderful sort of mini icebergs around the boats. That's not how any river freezes over. It's flat, smooth ice. We've all seen that. Fine. We're actually right about every single one of those points. But then flip it around, and let's look at what's true about that painting. One, it's an extremely small-scale action, if you look at the painting, just a few boats. And that was true. Two, these men look desperate, right? And there's good reason for them to look desperate. Washington, his whole approach in the Revolution, by and large, was just to avoid major battles, avoid taking risks, knowing that the whole cause depended on the continued existence of the American army. He was rolling the dice that night. Everything was at stake that night. And if there's fear in those guys' eyes, as there is in that painting, they couldn't swim, right? Colonial Americans couldn't swim. This drove Benjamin Franklin crazy. It's like, can we just have sailors who can swim? But no one could swim, so you'd be scared on an icy night. Incredibly diverse array of folks, different kind of uniforms. It's true. The Army then was the main unifying force in America. Otherwise, none of these guys ever would have encountered each other. They'd be off in their own locales, and they'd never meet one another. There's some people who think there's one figure in the boat who's actually a woman. And the ladies in the audience might say this would make sense because she's actually rowing and doing the work while the guys are just standing there. And, by the way, standing, these boats were flat-bottomed boats. So it's not impossible to imagine that they actually were standing up. So is this painting a myth? Yeah, it has all sorts of misunderstandings and misconceptions in it. Is it a myth? Yes. It stands for a profound truth about our history. And I defy you to go to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City and look at that thing live, all 12 feet of it in its glory, and not be newly inspired by our country and its cause and its history. That's what a myth does. And what's happening right now is you have a left that wants to destroy all these myths that have sustained this nation, that are pillars of this nation, and create new myths. Create a myth that our history is solely a tale of oppression, rapine, and woe. To tell ourselves, to lie about ourselves, to lie about our own history, to throw away our greatness and make us a people totally navel-gazing and self-abased, right? This is what the New York Times 1619 Project is about. And this is how crazy stuff is at the moment. I would like to say National Review is the foremost debunker of the 1619 Project. We run a lot on it, but we weren't. The foremost debunker was a Trotskyite website. And what those guys were basically saying is, you know what? You people, with all your identity politics and your racial obsessions, are messing up the class war, right? So that's how weird stuff has gotten. And I'll just conclude with one last thought. We have a pincer movement going on because we have this domestic threat to tear us down. At the same time, we have an external threat in the form of China. You know, when Britain was the greatest country, most powerful country in the world for a couple centuries. And then when they declined, who did they hand it over to? They handed it over to us. And it was a clean handoff, right? Shared history, shared language, shared values. There's still some acts of hostility, right? We gave them Meghan Markle. In their wisdom, they sent her back, right? But if there's a handoff from us to China, it's going to be nothing like that. Nothing like that. No shared history, no shared language, obviously, no shared values. They hate and resent us, and they will not allow us just to become a second-tier power and go away and tend our own garden. They will rub our noses in it. So that's an enormous challenge. It's beyond the scope of my little talk here this afternoon. But one thing that's really, I think, going to stand us in good stead, both with the domestic threat and the external threat, is the basic commonsensical, deep-felt patriotism of most people in this country still. I just want to share this quote that I think captures the feeling most of us still have about America, and then I'll conclude, and I think Dan's going to come up, and we're going to take some questions. This was a quote by a guy named John Thornton Kirkland. He became the president of Harvard in the late 18th century. And this is what he said, quote, "We have learned to love our country because it is our country, because we are near it and in it and have an opportunity of being useful to it, because we breathe its air and share its bounties, because the sweat of our fathers' brows has subdued its soil, their blood watered its field, and their revered dust sleeps in its bosom, because it embraces our fathers and mothers, our wives and children, our brothers and sisters, because here are our altars and here are our firesides, because patriotism is the combined energy of the social affections, and he who can tear it from his heart commits sacrilege upon his nature." And my friends, I submit to you, there is a campaign, a very serious campaign of sacrilege afoot in this country as we speak, and we got to fight it on the beaches and the landing places in every way we can. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rich. That was amazing. Look, I think your message is one of the purest and best definitions of what we call nationalism. The word gets thrown around a lot these days, specifically on the right. The left throws it around too, just to tear it up, right? They want to destroy our happy heroes, our happy myths, these things that bring us together. And this is a common theme. And we've got to be smart about how we fight back against that. I want to go into a little bit of the different definitions here in a minute, but I want to speak for a second about your role at National Review. So, editor-in-chief of National Review. If you've never heard of National Review, it is one of America's oldest and best conservative magazines, and also a think tank with National Review Institute, started by William F. Buckley. What would William F. Buckley, first maybe describe briefly who Buckley is, and how would he view the current state of America and our conservative movement? Are we living his dream and vision?
Yeah, so Bill Buckley was the founder of National Review. It's a little hard to describe the size of his footprint in today's terms, because he was the foremost magazine editor, he was the foremost newspaper columnist, he was the foremost TV interviewer, he was the foremost popularizer of conservative ideas, the foremost debater. So you'd have to sort of scoop up 4 or 5 conservative stars, from Ben Shapiro across the spectrum, and meld them into one person to get Bill Buckley what he was, basically from the 1950s to the 1990s. And he was a practical man. He was willing to compromise, especially around politics, but deeply patriotic, would be horrified by what's happening on the left, but then also concerned about some trends on the right. Because his belief is that we had to, and this goes to what Dan was saying in his analogy about fighting fire with fire. No, you fight it with water. That was Bill Buckley's approach. We are better than them, right? We don't have to be the same as them because we are better than them. And we're going to go out and show it and demonstrate it every single day. So he wouldn't like the idea that we have to drag ourselves down to their level. And then also he was a big free market guy, so he'd be worried about some of the trends on the right that believe actually that conservatism took a wrong turn in the Reagan era and has made a mistake by its robust embrace of the market. And look, the market, it's not a religion, right? There are things that we can subsidize if necessary that have national security significance. But at the end of the day, the market is an enormous boon to individual well-being in this country and our national power. So as far as I'm concerned, if you're a nationalist, part of our tradition is the free market, and part of the reason we're going to beat China, if we are, is by harnessing the market.
Yeah, and look, that gets to I want to flesh out what you just said there, because I'm not sure everyone is aware of this sort of academic analysis of the factionalism on the right and what you just described. There's a lot more now, but for decades there's been that other factionalism, which is, okay, we stand for certain values, so shouldn't we use the power of government to make those things happen? Like that's one side, and they don't make a terrible argument. I'm sympathetic to this idea. And then there's others, more libertarian-leaning, who are like, no, you just got to let things happen. It'll be fine. Everybody can be atomized, individual liberty. If you maximize that, you'll get what you want. And I'm not so sure either party is correct here. Right. And where does nationalism fit into that? And then we'll talk a little bit about the divisions currently and how some people take that mantle of nationalism and say something that I'm not sure you and I agree with, even though I consider myself a nationalist in the sense that you talk about, this e pluribus unum idea, this idea that we're a single culture or a single entity. We speak a certain language. We celebrate similar holidays. We have this shared history and happy myths. But talk about that, flesh out that factionalism just slightly. So
there's some people who believe that we should just get government power and use it sort of willy-nilly to crush the opposition. I think that's an unworthy sentiment. I do think, though, I've never been opposed to all uses of government, and there are many areas where we need to use government to push back against the cultural excesses of the left where appropriate. Schools, okay? public schools are a function of government. It's entirely appropriate for government to write the rules about what teachers and administrators are going to do in class and what the curriculum is going to be. So it's not a free market idea to say, oh, government can't push back against CRT in the schools because they're government schools, right? Ron DeSantis' so-called Don't Say Gay bill, it's regulating what public employees, teachers, can say in the classroom. So to me, that's totally appropriate. And the problem we have, Dan, is the cultural left has kind of taken over all our institutions and elite institutions, and sort of it goes without anyone having decided or the public had any choice in it. So I think politics is a way to have people actually have their voice. And most of these things, gender ideology in schools, CRT, males competing in female sports, are hugely unpopular, right? And if people just have a say on them, they're going to push back. So that's appropriate. Now, the division over nationalism, my nationalism is fairly kind of lowest common denominator nationalism. Let's put our national interests first. Let's put every policy through a national interest test. There are others on the right who say nationalism is basically means a form of isolationism. It means a form of industrial policy and really fundamentally involving the government and the economy in a way that I think would backfire and hurt us. And I mean, that's just an argument we're going to have to
Well, it's an argument we're certainly having. I have it all the time because we're in the middle of a situation where we're supporting Ukraine against the fight against Russia. Right. It wasn't all that divisive at first. It became so. I cynically do think some people are looking for opportunities to be contrarians. Mm-hmm. But you got to ask yourself, what are we gaining from this? For simply money, that's what we're spending. Not even. It's actually just sending old weapons. There's a dollar value to that. Weapons that we're not necessarily needing or using. And we've gained a resurgence of European allies, a far better and stronger NATO that's spending a lot more on itself, demanding U.S. energy instead of Russian energy, extremely skeptical of China in a way that they weren't 5 minutes ago. There's major geostrategic gains to this, and like I say all the time, it is not America first to let Russia and China do whatever they want throughout the world. Whether you like it or not, it is a small world. Right. This is not the world of the 18th century. It took 3 months to cross the Atlantic. Now it takes 12 hours to get to the other side of the world where there's a war zone. Right. It is not a small world, no matter how much you wish it to be, or it is a small world, no matter how much you wish it to be a large one where we can just be disconnected from each other. And so, yeah, it's a debate. Maybe some people will ask about that. We've got about 8 minutes left. Let's take questions from the audience. I don't know if they're up already or not. Maybe they weren't expecting. Oh, there they go. I can kind of see them. If you're out of microphone, go ahead, because I can't see you.
Is it on? Oh, hi. My name's Lily Kate. I've been talking to a lot of people about nationalism lately, and a lot of them define it in a very similar way that you do. So defined with, a unifying history, language, and culture. But as we're seeing in the political spectrum, racial essentialism is becoming ever more increasing on the right and the left. And so I wanted to get your opinion. Does nationalism necessarily have a racial component or not? Because I think personally America has taken the racial part out and says we can work without it.
Right. No, I totally agree with you. I think white nationalism, black nationalism, these are contradictions in terms, right? They're antithetical to American nationalism, which it involves a loyalty to the nation above race and creed or other loyalties. So this is where, I push back a little bit against the idea that American nationalism is totally different from any other form of nationalism. It doesn't have a cultural element. It does. But we are different than European, our nationalism is different than European nationalism that often has had kind of just inexorably that kind of racial element. And this country, the attitude has always been, you come here and we assimilate you. Now that's a huge part of the deal, right? You got to want to be part of us, right? There's certain things that constitute being part of us, and we're going to insist that you adopt those. But once you do, you're in. And I think that's the correct attitude. I think anything different for the right is a total blind alley morally and politically, and is un-American and antithetical to our best traditions.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Agree. Over here.
I'm from Killeen, Texas. I had a question. In the beginning, on the intro, you spoke about government spending. Currently, America is $31 trillion in debt, roughly. And every year we've had a deficit since 2001. The only way to fix this, I believe, is stop spending money. But I don't think... Yeah,
so simple-minded.
Yes.
Yeah, and you know...
Dan never thought of that.
Yeah, I know. I believe he has. And it seems as a finance major, as a junior, I can figure that out. So I don't think Congress can.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't see why they can't. I mean, so basically, I don't inherently believe that the majority of either party wants to do that. And I'm just curious on what your thoughts on that.
You want me to?
I mean, you're right? I mean, you're right. And look, Trump did a lot of good things. I have a friend who, a social conservative, who a friend of his was appalled by something Trump did. I don't know what it was during the 4 years. And he emailed my friend and said, no Supreme Court justice is worth this. And my friend emailed back, well, 3 Supreme Court justices are. But this is something that Trump really is a sign that the Republican Party was moving away from its commitment to cutting spending. That's a very bad thing. It won't matter until it does. And at some point, it will matter. And it's already a big debt. Now interest rates are going up. We've been able to build the debt in a low interest rate environment that doesn't exist anymore. So eventually, it's going to really hurt us.
And this is what I would say about the budget getting the debt under control. And this is especially important for your generation and my generation, for that matter, to remember. 2/3 of our spending is mandatory spending. What we argue about every year is discretionary spending, the size of all of our agencies, basically, right? The size of HHS, the size of the military. All of this stuff is appropriations that we vote on every year. And we argue about it, and there's a lot of virtue signaling and a lot of grandstanding. We'll shut down the government, and we're fighting over single-digit percentage points of the actual spending. And nobody realizes this. Well, some people realize it. Now you all realize it. 2/3 is mandatory spending. So what is that? Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and interest on the debt. Your welfare programs, things that we don't actually appropriate every year. And that share, by the way, is only growing. Even as we increase the size of government by a monetary value, the share of discretionary spending actually continues to fall. So you have this real problem, and I mentioned this in my speech earlier, where Americans have been bought off with false promises forever. We will take care of you when you reach this age. Okay, yeah, you're going to live a lot longer than you were 50 years ago, but we're still going to take care of you. We're not even going to change the retirement age. This is going to affect you a lot. I mentioned it in my speech. They're going to want to raise your taxes, and that's a transfer of wealth from the younger generation to an older generation. There's a lot of older folks, maybe some older folks in here who are like, stop talking about this, Dan. Don't touch my Social Security. The government wasted it all. It's actually not true. The problem with Social Security is the formula, and we have less workers paying into it than we did 60 years ago. It's a very simple math formula, and it's what you should talk about to your peers when you're talking about the budget. It's the hardest thing to solve because nobody wants to touch it, because then we'll get destroyed in the election. We will, because your grandmother comes out and votes, even when you don't. So it's a wonky discussion, but it's an important one. I think we got time for 1 or 2 more if we answer fast.
Over here. Dan, recently, about a year ago or so, I saw you kind of do a bit of a bipartisan thing with Trevor Noah of The Daily Show. You came on his show and spoke with him, and it was a really nice back and forth that y'all had. Recently in the news, it turns out that he's leaving Comedy Central, leaving The Daily Show, and their viewers have dropped drastically. Do you think that the movement is working for conservatism, that we're seeing these liberal posts, these liberal media outlets kind of almost falling by the wayside, or is this just one instance, in a group of success for them?
That's interesting. I think people are really tired of political humor. I think people just want humor. I think that's my simple answer to that, yeah.
Trevor Noah, did he ever say anything funny? That, it's just like, it's like pretending I'm a comedian. I'm a commentator. I'm not a comedian, and I think comedy is pretty important to Comedy Central. And And also, it's so monochromatic, right? Except for Greg Gutfeld, you can turn on any late night host, and it's all exactly the same thing. And anyone that occasionally steps out of line, like Jimmy Fallon, people are outraged. So there's a saturation of a market that's not particularly funny.
Yeah, they've really backed themselves into a corner. It's okay to have political humor. Greg Gutfeld's actually really funny.
Yeah.
And there might be, Trevor Noah was occasionally funny. What was a little interesting about him when I met him was he's not nearly as political as you would think based on his monologue. So I'm not sure what accounts for that, but he's a foreigner, and I think he was genuinely curious in what I had to say. So I'm not sure why his monologues were extremely political and partisan.
Hi, I'm Emma. So earlier you said that different people have like different definitions of nationalism.
I can't. Can you hear? I can't hear.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. So earlier you said that different people have different definitions of nationalism. What's like the worst definition you've heard of it?
The worst definition of nationalism? It's ethnic nationalism, any place, any form. So the worst definition of nationalism would be, we're a white country, and that's no one else belongs here, and that's what our nation is, which is a lie. But that would be the worst definition. There are very few people, thank God, who actually define it that way, but that'd be the worst.
Fully agree. Can we give it up for Rich Lowry? Thank you, Rich. Rich, thank you so much.
Thanks, Dan. That's great. Appreciate it.
Thank you.